Hello, welcome to Taxpayer Alert. I'm Al Segalla. I'll be your moderator. I'm also president of the Calaveras County Taxpayer Association, who's helping to make this event possible. We are really lucky this time. We have, as a guest, one of the founders of the Taxpayer Association, but not just that, he's also a moderator on other shows at the same station. His name is Cory Burnell. Cory, welcome.
Oh, welcome. Thank you, Al. It's good to spend some time with you. It's been a little while.
Yeah. We've had, that's 10 years, 11 years ago.
Yeah, you keep up the good work at CCTA, so thank you for that.
Now, if I remember, you had a little boy about 4 feet high, and he's not 4 feet high anymore.
He's a little bigger now. Yeah, he's a freshman at Grand Canyon University now, so he's off in Phoenix, and all grown up almost, I guess you'd say.
And he's taking finances?
Yeah, he's studying finance.
I understand that you have your own financial firm and you help people with their finances, including stocks and everything else.
That's right, yeah. Financial planning and investing, yeah.
Yeah. So you've been a pretty busy boy.
Oh, yeah. Every year seems to present some crisis that we need to deal with in the investment market. So this year was no different.
Well, that could be a good segue into our crisis with the virus.
That's right.
And we have quite a problem over the last months, almost a year, with the COVID-19 virus, and it's really hurt our economy quite a bit. And we've been getting a lot of information that turned out to be not true and constantly changing. So one of the things we want to do now is just look, what is the truth and what's really real and what can we look forward to? Cory, I think one of the first items that you were interested in was therapeutics.
Yeah.
And tell us about that.
Well, yeah, in the investment world, this has been top of the mind awareness because we're wondering who is coming up with the best therapeutics, the most effective, how quickly, whether they can scale and get these therapeutics to market. So when we've seen, for example, Regeneron's antibody cocktail and, remdesivir, the antiviral drug, Gilead has had some success. Now we see Moderna is going to have, we believe they'll have their vaccine out in December of this year. One company we've invested in for clients and personally is Sorrento Therapeutics because they have an antibody cocktail that has been very effective. One of the antibodies out of 3 that they have in the cocktail cures the virus for 100% of the patients, and they're in phase 2 trials with that. So tremendous success, and we see those applications with the president recently, in fact, using antibody treatments, and tremendous success.
Also, vitamin D. It was discovered, I think it was in Scandinavia. Researchers found that there's 77% more likely to test positive for people who are deficient in vitamin D.
Right.
Vitamin D is a vitamin that it needs the sunshine if you don't take supplements. And so we have people in care facilities that may not get a lot of sunshine and maybe are not aware of how important vitamin D is, or maybe other things that would be important for our immune system. And what do you think? You think it'd be a good idea for testing, voluntary testing, not government, but to find out if these people that are most susceptible have a nice, strong immune system or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we know about viral infections is there's an immune response, right, that attempts to block the connection of the virus to cells, where that virus injects its innards into the cell and takes over the cell and replicates, right? So
Right.
vitamin D and zinc have been shown in studies to help block those receptors, and that's what these antibody therapeutics do too. They wrap that virus up, it prevent it from attaching to itself to cells and replicating. So yeah, anything along those lines is fantastic. What we have seen with the virus and the immune response is that sometimes, particularly in older folks, that immune response is too strong, causes inflammation in the lungs, and then dexamethasone is the anti-inflammatory that's getting applied to calm down that inflammation and our immune system response, so that our bodies can then successfully fight it off without drowning ourselves in pneumonia, for example.
Yeah, I think the president used that or something
That's right.
similar.
Yeah. Yeah, so with all of these therapies, I mean, we're seeing the statistics on infection death rate just plummet. If you get these therapies and if you're otherwise healthy, there's no reason you're going to die of COVID today. I mean, we see the CDC statistics a month ago said that at that time, COVID deaths, only 6% were COVID only. The other 94% had, on average, 2.6 other comorbidities. So people had other problems that made this more complicated and fatal or risky for them. Additionally, the therapeutics we're talking about are very recent. They're just coming out now, and these companies need to ramp up production. When we see, much of the difficulty in getting in these treatments being widespread right now is just the ability for companies to produce. So as more time goes on, that production is getting wider and wider spread, and everybody will have access to these therapies probably before the end of this year.
Boy, things are changing pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
I heard that maybe the hospitals are paid more if a death occurs, if it's connected with COVID or not.
Yeah.
And that may be the reason for reporting the death as being COVID caused when it really wasn't.
There are absolutely anecdotal stories we hear of people being told to code things COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, if we want to be skeptics about it, we just recently saw that flu cases in week 40 to 41 of the year right now are down 95% compared to a year ago. Flu cases are.
Right.
There's a couple reasons for that. I mean, one is our hygiene is much better today than it was a year ago. We're all very cautious about who we're speaking or spitting on, right? Speaking to and washing our hands and keeping distance. And so that naturally is going to knock down cold and flu contractions as well. So that would dampen the number of flu cases. Additionally, not all flu cases sometimes are reported a little bit later, and you got to aggregate them, so probably not all flu cases are reflected in that number, but 95% down is a big number. So
That's amazing.
Yeah, those two things of our better hygiene and social distancing, and then the fact that maybe not all cases have been counted yet, probably doesn't account for a 95% reduction.
Right.
Being the business I'm in, statistics are what I deal with all the time.
Right.
And so I would suspect that a significant portion of those flu cases have been coded as COVID-19 cases. And hence the 95% reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would explain the rising cases of COVID-19.
Yeah.
That's interesting. One of the things that we're doing is we're running around and wearing masks all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, with the masks, it's really hard to go around kissing people. It's very difficult. And that may be part of the reason why there's less transmission of diseases.
Right. Well, you just got to cut a hole in your mask, Al.
Speaking of masks, I'll pull out this little mask. This mask I got on the internet.
Yeah.
It's a gray color where the ones you see are kind of white and blue. The N95 masks are white and blue. And this mask is different in that it's been treated with copper oxide. And if you wanted to, the reason why this mask is different, it kills the virus. Okay, so this will, there's a 99% chance that this will prevent you from catching a virus. And where the other ones are, well, you might have the CDC says that they don't really, you have a 17% chance of catching the virus with a mask. I mean, people are 17, I forget the exact percentage, but it's pretty significant that people with masks are catching the virus, but not the treated masks, not the antiviral masks. Now, this show has a lot of valuable information.
Yeah.
And so this means that our viewing audience can now save the life of all the older people you know, like me. And you can do that by going on the internet and just Google copper oxide mask or medicated masks. They're inexpensive, they're reusable, and they can save a life, and they actually protect people.
So in reusable, if you were to wash them, it's not washing the copper out of the mask, right?
I'm not positive about that.
Okay.
So I've not been anxious to wash the mask.
Sure.
So I figured if there's any germs or viruses there, they're dead.
That's
so
right.
I'm okay, even if it's dirty.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
So can you imagine if these masks are made available to all the people that are susceptible, like in the nursing homes and even first responders, that they would not catch the virus? What a change that would make, and how quickly the crisis would be over.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. We've known of the antiviral properties of copper for a long time.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's not a general recommendation from the CDC.
I am too,
Yeah.
and that raises a big question in my mind. Why does the CDC not be anxious to report on some therapeutics like vitamin D and there's also C and zinc and things that help people build up immune system? Some doctors don't believe that in nutritional science at all.
Right.
They think it's quackery. And so as a result, their patients are more likely to be deficient in something unless they get information elsewhere. So I think that one thing that we could learn from this is that we have to really use our own minds, and we have to protect people. And the best way to do that is to help the people that are older or susceptible to get these masks, and also to build up their immune system. And they can do that by going online to the Linus Pauling Institute, or just Google in their immune system, and you'll be able to find plenty of advice on what things you need to have, and also whether you need blood tests or maybe a hair sample. Hair samples are used to check for mineral deficiencies, where blood samples can catch things like vitamin D and C and other things that you need. So we have a vaccine that's coming up. We have therapeutics that are coming up, and now we just discovered almost an instant way to save people. One of the things that we've been facing is reporting the cases. We mentioned that the cases are called cases when actually there may be a small percentage are really cases. So that gives a rise to fear.
Right.
And then morbidity, the number of people that die has been exaggerated, and we've discovered that it's been exaggerated like 96%. where actually 4% of the cases are really death are really caused by the virus. There are other causes like heart attacks and cancer and a lot of other things.
Yeah.
And some say that maybe there's an incentive to report if there's COVID involved, that the cause of death is COVID, and that's how we get such a skewed statistic.
Well, whenever you have government money involved, where there's a reimbursement of sorts, you have a system motivated to get that reimbursement.
You get that money.
Yeah. So if we have government policy that essentially classifies COVID treatment as more expensive, therefore a larger reimbursement, and then you have the medical system motivated to classify it as COVID in order to get that reimbursement, of course.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is that we have programs such as this where some basic truths and ideas can get out and help people. And in our community, I think Calaveras County had an increase in cases, people that went into the hospital with COVID, and also an increase in deaths. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it was essentially because of the virus getting into the Avalon. I don't want to say old folks' home, but that facility where it's a rest home and for the elderly, and that the virus got in there to the most risky in the community, and hence you have a disaster, and that's unfortunate that it even got there. But otherwise, outside of the Avalon event, our community has been relatively healthy, and the hospitals here have never been close to being overwhelmed. I believe there's 6 ICU beds, and not been close to full there at any time that I've known about during the crisis. I will say on the case reporting, one thing that's very, very important for viewers to understand about how cases are inflated. The New York Times ran an article about a month ago talking about how PCR tests work. And that's if you were to have gone up to our fairgrounds and get a COVID-19 test, you would have had a PCR test. Well, they swab your nasal passages, and they take that matter, and then they magnify it looking for the COVID-19 virus. And they run this through cycles that continually magnify that matter, looking for the proteins that they're after. So what the New York Times found is that these PCR tests generally run 37 to 40 cycle thresholds. Each one of those cycles is a magnification. The scientists that they are interviewed in the article said that's far too sensitive. They shouldn't run any more than 30 cycle thresholds. If you run that many cycle thresholds, you'll find fragments of the virus that are not infectious. In fact, you would have never even known that you had the virus.
Right.
In fact, one of the scientists in the article said it's like going into a room and finding a hair follicle from, say, a murder suspect, and then claiming that the murder suspect is still in the room. And that's not the case. Right. So we list these as positive cases, even though the virus isn't actually there.
What percentage of the of this statistic of positive cases do you think is from that process?
Yeah, good question. The New York Times asked that question and found the answer. Up to 90% of the cases in Massachusetts, I want to say New York, there were 3 states that the Times article, and your viewers can just Google the New York Times article. I believe it was, your COVID test may be positive, or your COVID test might be positive and maybe it shouldn't be, something like that. So up to 90% of the PCR tests that are coming back positive may have never had any infectious level of the virus, maybe just fragments of the virus. And that's because of the oversensitivity of the test, which gets to something you raised earlier. Why would we want to be using tests that are overly sensitive?
Well, one reason would be to continue an alarm, so people will do as they're told, like wear masks.
Right. Well, when you watch the news, watch the evening news, and it reports case count.
Right.
It doesn't really report death count. It reports total deaths because 210,000 is a big number.
Right.
It doesn't report daily deaths. We're actually only going up in the entire United States right now, on average 600 to 700 deaths per day. So that's a 7-day weekly average recently.
Now, of those reported deaths, how many of those are in the 96% versus the 4%?
Well, I'll correct that number. The CDC was 6% and 94% was their number.
Okay.
Flip that 4 and the 6, just correct. But even so, let's say we're having an average of 700 COVID deaths per day. Well, hey, if say 90% of them have comorbidities to 2.6, I mean, so that's really only 60 or 70 COVID only. Well, that would be if that was a 10% number. If it's a 6% number, it's really only say 40 COVID only deaths out of that 700 per day.
This is honest information.
Yeah, this is straight. Anybody can find this information on Wikipedia.
So it's becoming clear that the danger from this disease is highly overrated.
That's right, and now the CDC has a chart out saying your survival rate if you contract COVID-19 is 99.5%, depending on your age bands. Yeah. If you're over age 70, I think it's a 94-95% survival rate. But importantly, when they talk case count, that's not an important number. What's important is if you actually contract the infection,
right,
and then whether you die. It's what's called the infection death rate.
Right.
So if we were to back up to March, let's go back in time to March when the death rate on COVID-19 was being reported at 3.4%. That was first off COVID classified deaths and then cases. That was a case death rate of 3.4%. It was not an infection death rate. And then Stanford, and I think it was USC or UCLA, ran some antibody tests, and we're finding that actually millions of Californians already had antibodies to this, so they had already had it. So then we started to, that was in, say, April, I think, April and May, that data started to come out. We started to recalibrate and say, wait, we ought to be looking at infection death rate. Well, now we're finding that the infection death rate is right down under 0.25% of people that actually get infected and die. And that's all people. That's including those who are high risk. So if you're low risk, that infection death rate is very, very, it's rather immaterial, actually.
One of the recommendations from the establishment was shut down the economy and prevent people from moving, almost put everybody in house arrest. And I think our president really objected to this way of treating it. Hindsight seems to indicate that he was correct when you take in consideration the in Scandinavia, who did a whole different approach, and I think Wyoming or South Dakota just wouldn't do any of that.
In South Dakota,
and they had lower rates.
Yeah. Well, they had their curve sooner. So Sweden came under a lot of pressure, for example, because their peak came sooner, and now they just don't have COVID-19 deaths anymore. And Sweden's I think the best example in Scandinavia because it's the most urban. It's got a couple big urban centers, with the largest being Stockholm. So whereas some of the other Scandinavian countries are rather rural, and so it would make sense that they would have very low contraction rates, because people just aren't crawling all over each other as much.
Or kissing each other.
Right. Maybe the Swedes kiss more.
So we have, there may be some ideology creeping into this, and sometimes government policy reflects that. What reason would there be to continue a crisis?
Yeah. When you want to, as a government policymaker, you want to change policy and people buck against it because there's really no reason for them to make that change.
Right.
If you can create a crisis that drives them toward that change that you want, well, then you've made them, I guess, complicit with or interested in what it is you're selling and want to push them to, right? Whereas before they just didn't see any
Yeah.
reason to go along with it. So yeah.
So that's to change society and use fear as a means of doing that.
Yeah.
That's kind of scary in a way. But then again, a little bit of truth can just cause that to go away with a little puff of smoke.
Well, yeah, and you're finding that happen now as people, because we realize that from the data as this goes on longer, we're realizing that it's just not as dangerous of a virus as we speculated in February and March. Of course, we didn't know as much then.
Right.
So people are bucking against it, and you're having really essentially open rebellion to lockdowns and masking, and people just non-compliance is what you're having.
So this non-compliance rebellion is not based on irrational fear or opposition to regulations as much as it's based on science.
Yeah, it's based on fact.
Based
People
on
are
fact.
recognizing that, hey, wait a second, if I get this, I probably won't even get sick, let alone die.
Yeah. What annoying to me, major media is really not doing a good job of reporting all the facts.
Right.
And it seemed like if major media would just report the newest facts, like vitamin D, for instance, this thing could go away in a couple of weeks.
Well, we get to the motivations of why the crisis would exist, right?
Yeah.
Well, we're in an election year, and the mainstream
Well, it's
media has agendas.
well, you got politics and ideology.
Yeah.
Well, the good thing, the Taxpayer Association is non-political, but we sure get into the issues, and we certainly can handle ideology and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we're coming down to 2 minutes now in our show. What are some of the things that our audience should remember about what we learned?
You know, when it comes to the danger of the virus, I think that we've given them some good information there. And I think the president was right when he said, hey, don't let this control your life. Don't let this run your life. Go about life, be smart, good hygiene, and be smart about it. Particularly if you're high risk, you ought to take precautions, right?
Right.
But otherwise, don't let it dominate your life. I think it's a takeaway from the statistics we've talked about today. But from the ideological standpoint, that there are people in positions of power who want to use crisis to micromanage your life, take freedoms away from you, and you probably ought to buck against that if you want freedom on the other side of the crisis.
Yeah. Now, when we buck against it, we're talking about the vote at the ballot box in the voting booth, not at the gun store.
Yeah. I didn't say shoot against it. I said buck against it.
Well, one of the things that's sometimes hard to do when you dealing with things like death is to keep a sense of humor. But you have to if you're going to live a happy life and you're going to get positive results.
Yeah.
So we're coming down to the end, and I guess the bottom line is keep an open mind and care about those you love. Thank you for watching Taxpayer Alert.